مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. ربما تكم الاحتفالات في فيينا، ولكن يوشك الدم على إغراق قاعة الكونغرس الولايات المتحدة. إنني أتحدث بطبيعة الحال عن الجبهة التالية في المعركة حول اتفاق إيران النووي. في حين توصل العالم إلى اتفاق مع إيران حول فرض قيود على برنامجها النووي في مقابل رفع العقوبات الاقتصادية، لم يوافق الجميع. ادانت إسرائيل الاتفاقية. الدول العربية اثارت جلبة أقل، ولكنها لم تكن أقل معارضة. والآن ينتقل الجدل إلى كونغرس الولايات المتحدة، حيث الفرصة متاحت أمام السناتورات والممثلين للمدة 60 يوما لمراجعة الاتفاقية والتصويت حول رفضها. في نظامنا الدستوري يملك الرئيس سلطات واسعة في مجال السياسة الخارجية، وذلك يعني أنه سيلزم ثلثاً كلا مجلسي الكونغرس للتغلب على الرئيس. يروق الاتفاق لفئة قليلة، ولكن هل يوجد ما يكفي من الخصوم، ويشمل ذلك ضمن حزب الرئيس الخاص، لإحباط الاتفاق؟ لمناقشة الجوانب السياسية لاتفاق إيران النووي يسرني أن أرحب باللجنة تقدم الخبيرين السياسيين نورمان أورنستين وستيف كليمنز. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I'm sitting with my panel of political experts to discuss a very political topic, the Iran nuclear deal. The deal is done in Vienna, and now it's heading to the halls of Congress, where there is huge opposition and a vigorous debate is about to be launched. Gentlemen, let's talk about Congress and the nuclear deal. Norm, what is the legal process?
Well, we had this process very carefully established, and interestingly, the main drafter of the way in which this would be looked at by Congress, most of it Congress can't get involved in. The question is whether sanctions that are now in place can be lifted legally. But it's done in a fashion by Senator Bob Corker, Republican, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, in a way that gives the president enormous advantages. We have a 60-day period, and then both houses of Congress will vote. If they vote in effect to disapprove, which means they will not accept the lifting of any sanctions down the road, then the president can veto it. And a veto in the American constitutional system can be sustained. In other words, the president wins if 1/3 of either house of Congress goes along with him. Congress can only overrule him if they have 2/3 of the members of both houses. Now, there are enough Democrats in the House and the Senate, even though there are Republican majorities, that the president easily clears that hurdle. So the question becomes, how many Democrats are going to be uneasy about this deal and will defect from the position of their president?
And Steve, what are Congress's options? I understand that there's some political thinking that it makes benefit to have a resolution of approval versus a resolution of disapproval. Try to entangle some of this for our viewers.
Well, I haven't thought very much about the resolution of approval, but in the resolution of disapproval, I think, as Norm just laid out, they can zero in on various kinds of sanctions. There have been sanctions, and they can toughen sanctions. They could come in, I suppose, with the resolution of approval, you could sort of look at the fact that they may come in and approve dimensions of the deal and try to come in and affect areas like conventional arms transfers or ballistic missile research and try to do things like this. But I think that one of the things that's emerging right now are going to be different camps. Those camps that are essentially opposed to any deal on any grounds because the character of Iran is perceived to be one that you can never do a deal with. there'll be another camp, and I think Bob Corker's in that, that's highly skeptical of the deal, but wants to weigh and measure every dimension of this. And I'm not sure, Norm would have a greater sense of this, that within that resolution of disapproval, whether it allows a specificity to go in and mix, or whether it's simply just basically a yay or nay situation. My sense is that you're going to have a lot of senators, particularly senators, but maybe this will happen in the House as well, who will want to zero in on dimensions of the deal that they really, really don't like and they have a problem with.
Now, even before the Congress begins deliberating on this, there's going to be a major event in New York. The administration is taking the Vienna deal straight to the UN Security Council, wrapping that in a resolution and enshrining it in international law before Congress votes. What's the politics of this back here in Washington?
This is what we call hardball politics, Rob. And there are a lot of members of Congress, including plenty of Democrats, who are quite upset about this. They want Congress to have a role, even if it's a role that ultimately, probably with a minority, supports the president. But once the UN acts, and that's of course within this 60-day clock ticking, that puts enormous additional pressure on members of Congress. Because to reject the deal after it's gotten the seal of approval of the United Nations Security Council makes the U.S. look worse. So it gives the president more leverage, but there'll be some harsh feelings that will flow from this. It's very clear from this act, from the president's press conference the other day, which was unprecedented in the sense that after they'd finished asking the questions, usually a president's walking out the door before the last question is finished. This time he stayed and said, "Don't you have any more?" "Well, I've got a few that you haven't raised." He is putting an enormous amount of pressure on to make this happen. This is his major foreign policy accomplishment, and Joe Biden, even as we speak, is lobbying members on Capitol Hill, going around to news shows to make the case for this deal, and going to the UN ratchets it up further.
That's right. He's not going to, essentially, he's creating a very high hill for Congress to take this down, and it's going to be very, very hard to walk away from the other great world stakeholders on the permanent members of the Security Council, and so he's stacking the deck so much. And you also have to remember that before Congress had carved out its place in the discussion, it really didn't have one. The president kept saying there is no vote. This is not a treaty that needs to be ratified. This is an international arrangement within the full purview of the executive branch, the same executive branch power that allows them to negotiate status of forces agreements around the world. When John Bolton was helping to drive the Proliferation Security Initiative, and you had Dick Cheney and George Bush, that was done under the same deal. These were not ratified treaties or agreements where Congress had a vote or say. They were simply done. So this executive branch, though conceding on the plan they went through with Bob Corker, fundamentally resents and doesn't want to give the Congress too much leverage or set that precedent. So that's another one of the drivers to the UN.
All right, let's look at some of the players. First, the majority, the Republicans in the House and the Senate. Steve, are they unanimous?
No, not at all. I think well, most people in Congress seem to be running for president right now. At least on the Republican side, but many of them are, and almost all of them, without a doubt, before they had heard any element of the deal, had come out and slammed it. So they look at this, beyond the substance of the arrangement and whether it fits national security interests. They want to rail against something that would give President Obama a legacy-building national security credit. So there's that. I think the most interesting Republican right now is Senator Bob Corker, who has been judicious, careful, cautious, kept his powder dry, and he's sort of channeling people like Richard Lugar and others who are serious strategists. And he's someone who could very much come out of this as someone who's respected as an independent thinker, not someone knee-jerk. But there's just no doubt that 90% of the Republican Party has already cast its lot very much against the deal.
I can tell you, having sat in very private meetings with Senator Corker, that he's an extremely thoughtful and deliberate person on these topics, yes.
And takes his responsibility seriously. And if we go back, when the Dodd-Frank financial regulation bill was up and being considered, Republicans wanted to unite against any kind of bill. Corker actually negotiated very much with Chris Dodd to the great dismay of his own leadership. But this is one of those issues where I would disagree with Steve only to this extent. He said 90% of Republicans, 99.9%. And the reality is any Republican, because the party is taking such a vociferous, united position on this, any Republican who votes for this deal is going to get tremendous pressure and a lot of criticism from within the party. So it's going to be a very rare phenomenon to see somebody come out against it.
So
let me just say, come out for it. My guess is that Corker will probably end up opposing it, but if I had to guess now, my guess is he will not oppose it with flowery language. He will say there's a lot here that's quite valuable, but I'm going to oppose it because it doesn't give us quite what we want and it's got these flaws. It'll be more that.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to discuss the Democrats, who's important, who are the key swing votes, and then how all of this debate plays in our emerging presidential contest in just a moment. Again, my panel of political experts include Steve Clemens. Steve is the Washington editor-at-large for The Atlantic and editor of Atlantic Live. He's also a senior fellow and founder of the American Strategy Program at the New America Foundation, a prominent think tank here in Washington. This is where he previously served as executive vice president. Steve writes and speaks frequently about the D.C. political scene, foreign policy, and national security issues, and domestic and global economic policy challenges. Sitting to his right is Norman Ornstein. Norm is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, an election analyst for CBS News, and a contributor to the National Journal and Atlantic magazines. His newest book is It's Even Worse Than It Looks: How the American Constitutional System Collided with the New Politics of Extremism. So, let's talk for a moment about Democrats. Who matters?
The one name that keeps coming up over and over again is Chuck Schumer, senator from New York, who is going to be the next Democratic leader when Harry Reid, the current leader, retires at the end of next year. Now, when you're the leader, you have a different set of responsibilities. But when you're the senator from New York, you are very, very sensitive to the large Jewish community there and to your relationship with Israeli leaders. The fact that all Israeli political leaders, left and right, have united in opposition to this deal puts Schumer in a difficult position. He's been a skeptic about the deal. If he comes out strongly against it, it will complicate matters for the president. But frankly, the White House, even though Schumer is an enormous opinion leader, now has Speaker Pelosi saying that she is in favor of the deal, and it's in the House of Representatives. You only need 1/3 of the members in one house. You could lose the Senate if Schumer goes the other way, but they've still got the backstop of the House. And there, too, at least a few of the prominent members, people like Chris Van Hollen, who's a major figure in foreign policy in the House, running for the Senate, actually, will be an important player in terms of whether he can shepherd through the votes for this.
I completely agree with Norm. I think that there's some other personalities who will emerge in this who are interesting. I think Bob Menendez of New Jersey is someone who was the chairman of the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, had to step down because of legal issues, and nonetheless is in the Senate. He's very much aligned with those right now who are opposed to the deal. So he's a Democrat out there, and that will not make as much difference as Schumer, but he'll be there. And then there are others like Senator Chris Murphy who are beginning to emerge as sort of principled, thoughtful strategists. There haven't been a lot in the Democratic Party ranks who can basically talk the substance of the deal and seem to be emerging and developing there. And then the one outside the Senate who used to be there, who everyone is going to be watching on this, is Hillary Clinton. So the presidential race and where Hillary is and how she deals with this must create some discomfort for her, particularly with political fundraising and the various pressures, particularly around the American Jewish community, that's going to have a lot of concerns about the Iran deal, is that a lot of folks anticipating that Hillary will be their nominee on the Democratic ticket and the future of this are going to be looking at that dynamic. And so you have to mention Hillary along with the dynamics of what may unroll on the Democratic side in the Senate.
So when we put all this together, do you think that first the legislation on this deal will be disapproved, the deal will be disapproved in the first go-around by majority votes in both the House and the Senate?
I think there's almost no doubt that it will be disapproved by majority votes because you're going to get near unanimity on the Republican side, and they have majorities in both houses.
Yeah, I think it's a simple mathematical formula that despite the fact that I find it compelling, we can have a discussion, that I think there are strengths and very strong rationale for this agreement. This is going to be a political judgment, not one based on the substance and the merits of this particular deal. It's something where the Republican Party will not give it that much latitude to think through.
Let me note here that there's a backstory here that we need to keep in mind. And some of it involves the strategy that Israelis will use and their allies as well. If it becomes clear, as it probably will, that after that first vote, the president's going to be able to muster at least the 1/3 to hold on to this deal. The next question becomes whether you can bargain for something else. And that something else is knowing that this deal will mean more money going to Iran, more opportunities to send money and maybe even arms to Hezbollah, Hamas, to play a mischievous role in the region. Will a part of the deal that brings some people around on this be a commitment to a much more aggressive move, including more money to Israel to protect itself against those threats from Hezbollah and Hamas, more opportunities to intervene in Syria and other parts of the region, involving both money and commitments for more forceful action? What kind of arrangement will you make where you'll step back a little bit from condemnation if you know that it's going to be a fait accompli? And we haven't really started those discussions yet. So Bob Corker, as the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, has promised a thorough discussion and debate over this 60-day period. A good portion of it, my guess is going to be about what do we do after the deal and what kinds of commitments can we make to make sure that the worst case scenarios here, not surrounding nuclear weapons, but the things that could flow with a newly emerging Iran with money, to keep it from making terrible mischief.
All right, so over the course of the 60 days, there's going to be intense pressure. I know, for example, that not just the Prime Minister of Israel, but the head of the Labor Party, sort of an American darling, is going to be showing up in Washington to urge people to take a tough position on this deal. Is there a chance that the president can lose this vote in Congress?
Well, he's going to lose the vote in Congress.
But is there a chance it's going to be overridden by Congress?
I don't think so. I mean, anything could happen, but in my view, one of the things that Prime Minister Netanyahu has done is he's already set the marketplace for what the system thinks about his views. He's become almost irrelevant to the debate. He can't apply more bluster, he can't apply more pressure, he can't behave more badly than he already has. He's played his hand, and the negotiations proceeded. They got a Lausanne agreement, and many people, both on the Republican and Democratic side last April, were shocked by how much they actually did get. And so the political marketplace has already begun to discount, in my view, the Israeli position because it's become so predictably blustery but without traction.
So let me put on just the purely pragmatic political hat and focus on where the president's backstop is, where his need is. It's getting basically 2/3, a little bit more, of his Democrats in the House to support this deal so that he's got 1/3 of the House behind him. For most of those members, they're going to have some concerns. They'll have substantive concerns, but they're also going to worry, what about the Jewish voters in my own district? What about the contributors? Will they be so upset if I support this deal that it will cause me great political pain? Probably not so much for many of them. They're in very safe districts. The big donors on the Jewish side who would be really upset with this are all on the Republican side now. Our politics have divided in partisan terms on the issue of support for Israel in a way that we have never seen before. And you have an awful lot of people where they're going to be able to find just as much push from Jewish voters and others in their districts saying, support the president, do this deal as anything else. So it's going to be an uphill slog. Now, I agree with Steve. If Bibi had taken a different tack on this, going back a long time, had been less shrill, had turned it into less of a partisan issue from the get-go, we might be in a somewhat different position now. At least you'd have people thinking and leaning in different ways. But it's turned it more partisan, and that's really, I think, complicated the task of those who want to kill this deal as much as they can.
Steve earlier mentioned Hillary Clinton and the quandary this puts her in. Is there a quandary for Hillary in this?
Right now, Hillary has supported the accord, but said, and this is an important matter, if there are any violations, we should come down hard militarily. She's trying to keep that strong national security stance while also supporting her president. And I think that also will give some backing to those nervous Democrats in Congress who will end up supporting it.
Okay, friends, I'm sorry that we have to close it here. Thank you so much. Fascinating discussion. My assumption is we'll be back talking about this before long. Enjoy the month and enjoy the summer. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الاتفاقية وخاصة حول تأثيرها على حملتنا الرئاسية، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhurra.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.